Hello and welcome to How Do I Answer Exam Questions, the GCSE Sociology edition. You may have noticed that exam questions repeat a certain formula, and that may mean that once you've learned the trick, once you've learned the knack, answering them becomes a lot easier. So if you're stuck for how to answer a certain type of question or just sociology questions in general, hopefully the examples I'm going to go through will make everything a lot clearer for you. One area where students struggle in sociology are items and sources. These are actually really useful pieces of information, and answering questions on them, you have a massive advantage because there's information in front of you. You want to think about trends, patterns, statistics, facts, opinions, and often for the more extended questions, you're then asked to link it to prior knowledge. So if we take an example from one of the exam papers, the source here is crime data, really common type of item. And if you look at the first question, from item A, examine one weakness of using police recorded crime statistics in research. Now, that's asking for prior knowledge, and all you're having to do there is to show that you know what police recorded crime statistics are and a weakness of it. So you don't even need to use the item other than to refer to what it is, and that's police recorded crime. A lot of people, they start talking about changes in the numbers, trends, patterns. That's not for this question. The 2-mark question will be a very simple, do you know this keyword? Can you explain it? And in this case, it's a weakness. So check that. Always check it's not advantage or disadvantage. It's strength or weakness. That qualifying term is key here. So an answer would be something like the dark figure. There's a lot of crime which happens which doesn't get solved, which doesn't get reported, which doesn't get recorded. For the longer question, I would think of this as two-mark questions. So similar to the one we've just done, break it down. Describe the type of statistical data shown in item A. That's the first part of the question. So looking at the statistical data, well, it's quantitative, it's numbers. So it's crime numbers, crime figures. So you state that and explain what that means. In this case, it's the crime that's been recorded by the police. Identify the trend shown by the data and explain one factor. Now, trend is the overall pattern. So this data starts at around 3,000 and finishes at just over 5,000 crimes. So the trend is it's an upward pattern. Yes, it goes much higher than that. Yes, it goes up and down. And students will often start micro-analysing, well, at this point where it goes up this much and then down this bit, and that's not what it's looking for. The trend is, if you drew a line of best fit, would it be up, would it be down, or is there not a line of best fit at all? Is there no pattern? Then it's asking for explain one factor which may account for this trend. So if the trend has gone up, why has it gone up? If it's gone down, why has it gone down? If there isn't a trend, why is that? So in the case of recorded crime, it could be anything. It could be there is more crime. It could be that the police are better at recording crime. It could be that definitions have changed, so that what used to be a crime, or what didn't used to be a crime is now a crime rather. So it's just applying your knowledge from the exam in a clear and simple way. So if you think about both of these questions, they're point explain and point explain twice. So whenever you get an item, think about the information that it's telling you. Don't just copy out the item verbatim. Don't just reword it and re-describe it for the examiner. They're not interested in that. It is all about the analysis. Notice it's using terms like examine, explain, identify. Yeah. So you need to do that in your answers. 3-mark questions are generally questions that students are very strong on, but a lot of students, they miss the 3rd mark, or they completely misunderstand the key term. So first off, you need to revise your key terms. Notice I've highlighted them here: achieve status and social mobility. So the first thing you would do to get 1 mark, you'd define those key terms. So achieve status is status that you've achieved through education, for example. And that would get you 2nd mark. You go straight into an example. This means you study for a degree, you get a better job, better earning potential, etc., etc. you're seen as higher class because you're a graduate, whatever it might be. Or identify and describe one example of social mobility. Social mobility is moving up or down a social class. An example of this could be intergenerational. Your parents have working class jobs, you become a professional in a middle class job, you're seen as middle class. This means you've moved up and shown social mobility. So what you do is you make a point, you define that key term. So always, if you need to highlight it, underline it, whatever it might be, define that key term, show the examiner you know what it means. Give a real life example, and that's often a lot easier. Students give me 2 or 3 and you only need 1. So just what would it look like if you had it in front of you? Who would it look like? And then explain it. This is why it's relevant. And it's that last bit, this is why it's important, this is what it shows, this is what it means, that students miss off and they don't get the mark. So if you get in the habit of doing that, practice 3-mark questions, your grades will go up massively when you do mock exams and the real thing. 4-mark questions tend to fall into 2 different types really. But identify and explain is the key issue here. And you'll notice that this is usually where the examiners put in research methods. So if you haven't been revising research methods, if you haven't been going over your research methods, you need to, because you'll drop 2 marks most likely if you don't know your research methods. Again, we're often using point, evidence, explain, and then linking it back to the question. So here, if you look at this question, identify one function of the family and explain it. So you define what a function of the family is, whether that's primary socialization, this is teaching the norms and values. And then if you've picked that example, how would you investigate this function using unstructured interviews? So you need to know that unstructured interviews are like a chat. They're high in validity, there's no set pattern, the respondents can guide the conversation. And if you can talk about the advantages and disadvantages of that, you relate it, then you link it back to the example you've picked. So in our case, socialization. So I'd use unstructured interviews because they're high in validity. You'd be able to get lots of different opinions about how kids are socialized from their parents and how kids feel they're socialized by their parents. And you can make it much simpler than that. That's way too much detail. So the model answer would be, one function of the family is primary socialization. This is where norms and values are passed on from parent to child. I would use unstructured interviews because they're high in validity and you'd get a real life picture of how parents socialize their children. That would get you 4 marks and would be a really, really nice answer. So again, with these 4-mark questions, you have to really think of them as 2-parters. Define and explain the key term. Give an example of the method or an example of the key term. Link it back to the advantages and disadvantages. Link it back to what the question is asking you for. In this case, it's a function of the family, but it could be anything from any of the modules. So with that in mind, practice these and you'll find they're really easy and you'll get lots and lots of marks and your grade will fly up. Okay, essays. I can hear you groaning from here. Some students just avoid doing essays. If you do that, you will not pass this course. Essays are not that difficult. If you look at them, they're 12-mark questions. They are designed to separate the very, very top grades from the middle grades. But everybody can score grades on an essay, everyone can get marks. And that comes with how you start. So start nice and simply. I would do a 2-sentence introduction and then 1 opening P or paragraph, and that will score you probably 4 marks if you do that correctly. So if we take the example of an essay here and go through it. First off, all of your essays are going to start with discuss how far sociologists. You can put a line through that, you can bracket it. When we bug this, they're all going to say that. So all you've got to know is that you have to look at different sociologists. In this case, it would agree that roles within relationships have become increasingly symmetrical. Now, there are some clues in that question. First off, roles within relationships. So this is from the family module. We're talking about the relationships of people within families. So we highlight that and we think about what that could mean. And then increasingly symmetrical. Well, symmetrical families are a family type. It's a Young and Wilmot study, so you have to talk about that. So that's what I'd start with. I'd introduce the focus of the essay. So sociologists would not necessarily agree that roles within the family and family relationships have become increasingly symmetrical. And then in this case, you would put that some would say it has, such as Young and Wilmot, but generally most haven't. I would then go into a Peel paragraph defining things like roles within the family. So maybe the instrumental role and the expressive role, the role of the husband and the wife, nuclear families being the norm. That would be your real life examples. That would be 2 marks easily there. Why is that important? Well, symmetrical families are when conjugal roles are shared. Link it back to the question. This comes from functionalists such as Young and Wilmot. If you say all that, that already shows the examiner you know what you're talking about. That will get you lots and lots of marks. And if you use the key terms and you explain it and you do what you've done for your 3 and your 4 mark questions, it's easy marks and it's quick. Keep it very simple. So let's move on to developing it and making sure we get more marks and a higher grade. Developing your essay is where students get a bit lost often, or where they don't quite get the marks they deserve. So in this case, we've set our stall out, we've shown we know what the keywords mean, we've shown we know what the essay is about, and we show which studies are relevant here. If you only know functionalist, feminist, Marxist, and you don't know specific sociologists, that's fine. You'll still get credit for that. But for the really ambitious amongst you, for the ones wanting the highest grades, this is where you really go to town and show you know your stuff. So functionalists, being a consensus sociologist, the next step is to go with either feminist or Marxist. Because we're talking about the family, I would always go with feminists. So Delphi and Leonard, radical feminists, the exploitation of women in the home is the total opposite of symmetrical families. So you can talk about how that used to be the tradition, you can talk about laws which have affected that, such as single parents becoming more prevalent because of the Divorce Act, whatever it might be, but link it to Delphi and Leonard, link it to how they argued that women were exploited by men in the home, dual burden, domestic labour, that kind of thing. You know, other feminists such as Oakley come in here. You can really pack a lot into a 4-mark question, as it were, and present that as a chunk of your essay. If you think of it, 12 marks, 3 4-mark answers, you've just been doing it for the whole exam. It's 1 4, and now you want 1 again. So I would go, feminists would say this, argue all of the key terms you want to choose, and then at the very end, this is different to, or this goes against Young and Wilmot symmetrical families because then you're showing that it links back to this idea of increasingly symmetrical, this change over time, and the roles and relationships. If you do that really well, you're going to get 6 to 8 marks. You may creep into 9 to 10, depending on how much depth you go into. What will really decide whether you get a 4-mark essay, I beg your pardon, is what you do next. So you've compared, you've contrasted, you've used lots of depth, and you haven't talked about every single thing in the family module, which is really key. Your task now is to get those 4 marks. So it's showing a detailed chain of argument. I would bring in real life examples here, and this is where I would criticise how strong Delphi and Leonard and Wilmot and Young are, how strong the feminist and functionalist viewpoints are. Were they relevant when they were writing 30, 40, 50 years ago? Are they relevant today? So you might want to talk about what a family is expected to be like today, whether it's the same as it used to be, what's changed. You might want to talk about something new, some change over time, a change to the law, such as the Marriage Act, the Equality Act from 2010 or from 2013. The fact we have gay marriage, homosexual families, those roles within the relationships could be taken on by men rather than women. So that would be a weakness of, say, feminism, and a strength towards Wilmot and Young. You may want to talk about the fact that there's so many different family types, it's impossible to say if they're symmetrical or not. So overall, you want to talk about what's changed, what stayed the same, what the overall pattern is, who's got the better argument. You don't have to bring in a third sociologist for this. A lot of students, they'll kind of tick off, I've said functionalist, I've said feminist, I've said Marxist. But if there's no depth to that, if it's just these sociologists believe this, you're not going to get the top marks. You need key terms, you need real life examples, and they're much easier than you think. All you have to do is as with the other questions, if it was stood in front of me, if these people were here, what would they look like? What would they be doing? How does it link to this question? Now, for a conclusion, you may want to write a third Peel paragraph. You may want to write a third Peel paragraph and then, ironically, we pick symmetrical here, mirror your introduction, a point and explanation. Overall, roles and relationships have become more symmetrical because, roles and relationships haven't become more symmetrical because. You don't need a half a page conclusion. You need a couple of lines to sum it all up, and maybe one final clarifying Peel before that, so that your essay will look roughly like 3 decent sized paragraphs and a couple of lines either side to bookend it. If you can do that consistently and you can do that within the time limits, you will get really, really high marks and you'll get the success you deserve. Remember, if you can get 6 out of 12 on every essay, that's going to massively boost your chances of a passing grade and massively boost your chances of going up by a grade boundary, if not 2. So don't ignore essays, they are so key. And if you're not sure on your technique or you're not sure on what to do, practice. Practice, practice, practice. Get me to mark essays, get me to give you feedback. Start now, and then by the time it comes to your real exam, you'll be so confident it won't matter. They'll be easy for you, and they should be. Essays are where you can show off just how much you've learned and what you know. One final little note on essays: they are not write me a page and a half on your opinion. That's not what the examiner wants. So try and avoid I think, I believe, at least too soon in the essay. By all means at the end if you want to, but sociologist first, keywords before that, and examples sandwiched in between. That will give you real depth, real structure, and show you know your stuff. Any questions, come to me. Write comments below, comments on the classroom. Happy to answer anything I can, and good luck.